Okay, now, I read all of his messages to you at the beginning, but in my response, I go through and repeat his messages so that, it's obvious what part of his messages I'm referring to. Now, he said the following: I came to that belief based on the evidence we have today for his existence, for the crucifixion and whether or not it really happened, and then based on the evidence for what happened after his death. As far as the Gnostic teachings, it's my understanding that they were just wrong. If you can show me some teachings by Jesus not in the Bible that line up with the Gnostic view, I'd be happy to learn from it. My response: there is no contemporary evidence that supports the historical existence of Jesus. I think it's funny that Christian apologists still use Josephus and Tacitus as evidence when they were proven to be forgeries a long time ago. Now, why is it your understanding that the Gnostic teachings were wrong? Well, I shouldn't have to ask that question since most modern denominations of Christianity teach that anything outside of the canonized version of the Bible is wrong. I also think it's funny that Christians hold a series of books that were picked and chosen by man out of many, many, many books written about their Savior so close to their hearts, yet completely reject the books that were rejected by these men, even though they were still written about their Lord and Savior. There are so many things about Christianity that make no sense to me. Anyway, the reasons these denominations rejected the non-canonized Gospels is because of the deeply spiritual nature of the teachings. The ecumenical council's goals had nothing to do with picking and choosing what they thought best represented Christ, and everything to do with picking and choosing the Gospels that they could use to control man more easily with. The nature of most of the non-canonized Gospels are, like I said, incredibly spiritual, so much so that that following them would give the individual spiritual freedom. Freedom is something that those in control fear to their bone. The Gnostics were people that, quote, believed that salvation lay not in merely worshiping Christ, but in psychic or pneumatic souls learning to free themselves from the material world via the revelation. According to this tradition, the answers to spiritual questions are to be found within and not without, unquote. Leaving these sorts of books in the Bible would encourage people to look within for their spiritual answers and to look within to find God instead of looking towards the pulpit, towards church on Sundays in a man-made building on man-made chairs, listening to a man preach his own personal interpretation of the canonized Gospels. You should read the Gospel of Mary, my personal favorite piece of Apocrypha. It's considered to be a Gnostic Gospel. What you described is not spirituality, it's blind faith, the fundamental tool used by organized religion. Then again, spirituality is an objective truth that can be subjectively perceived. So it could mean many things to many different people. I think that Christians believe they are spiritual because they have not been exposed to true spirituality. They're confusing dogma, doctrine, blind faith, and organized religion for spirituality. Another Gnostic gospel I would recommend is the Pistis Sophia. This book contains my favorite quote by Jesus. And say unto them, cease not to seek day and night, and stay not your hands until ye have found the purifying mysteries, which shall cleanse you and will transform you into pure light, that ye may enter into the height and inherit the light of my kingdom. Now, moving on to his next message. He said, I can send you every verse of the Bible and not one verse is pagan. I'd say that's a pretty good source for showing that Christianity is original. Show me a verse in the Bible that's pagan. Show me evidence, not claims, that the gospel was copied from ancient myth. My response: you should study religious transference. Christianity is not original, nor are many, many other religions and faiths. Christianity has original parts, like all other faiths, but many, many things from many, many faiths are borrowed or copied from one another. Like the basic model for the belief in Osiris, it is identical to the basic model of belief in Jesus. A Savior is born, dies for us, and is resurrected and will one day save us. We could take the idea of the Trinity, which is not only a borrowed word, but a borrowed concept from the much earlier Vedic religions, the Trimurti, 3 in 1 in unity. We could use Noah as an example, and the great deluge, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, which is just a retelling of the much, much, much earlier story of Zoisudra, and then the Babylonian retelling of the story featuring Utnapishtim, and then the Vedic retelling of the story featuring Manu. Noah, Manu, and Utnapishtim, all the perfect example of religious transference. The retelling of the original Sumerian story of the flood, with the original main character being Zoisudra. Again, In this message, you speak of Kemetticism as if it's the only pagan faith. Why do you do this? Just curious. You also mention the Nephilim. This is also a retelling. Actually, the whole book of Genesis is a retelling of the Sumerian Enuma Elish. The Nephilim were a race of beings that were the result of interbreeding between the Anunnaki, the gods, and human women. I could educate you more on this, but it goes so very, very, very deep, it would take a long time to try and teach about these things, the Anunnaki. Genesis even borrows the name of the first man, Adam. The Sumerians called him Adamu. We know that Judeo-Christianity borrowed these stories because these stories they borrowed from date much, much older than the stories of Judeo-Christianity. The Hebrews, Canaanites, Babylonians, etc. intermingled quite a bit in their time. It would make sense that they not only traded goods, but also traded beliefs. This godlike race you talk about is the Anunnaki, and the struggle for power between their two leader brothers, Enki and Enlil, turned out to be the model for most all other Abrahamic religions. Enki loved humanity and taught them, Enlil didn't. Some religions turned Enlil into Satan and Enki into Yah, which, by the way, is the Hebrew version of the word Yah, which is the Babylonian Akkadian translation of the word Enki. Like I said, this story is very deep and will take a lot of teaching. The gospel plays little, if no role at all, in their story. I've read every book of Enoch. There's more than one, and it's a non-canonized gospel. Another reason the ecumenical councils left out some of these books is because they would teach us the origins of mankind. Enoch was able to go with the Anunnaki into space or into the heavens. If you notice, there's a definite change of personality between the Old Testament God and the New Testament God. Some scholars believe that this is because the Old Testament God was actually Enlil, who in the New Testament would be made out as the Satan figure-like being. I don't really believe this, though. I think it's interesting. I think the change has to do with Jesus himself, who taught a very New Age, radical Eastern form of spirituality that had to do with self-spirituality and self-godliness, as opposed to some God that is external or outside of the self. And that's all so far. I just thought that whole little exchange was really interesting, and some people might be interested in hearing it. I'll keep you updated on any replies and further exchanges.